Well, last week we saw that beautiful picture of the Liturgy of Grace, of the light from the temple shining day in and day out on Israel, represented in those 12 loaves of baked bread. And the very next verse, this is a theme, everything turns upside down. It gets really intense and kind of jarring. So let's jump into the second half of Leviticus 24 to see what we're talking about. Leviticus 24, 10 through 23. Now an Israelite woman's son, whose father was an Egyptian, went out among the people of Israel. And the Israelite woman's son and a man of Israel fought in the camp. And the Israelite woman's son blasphemed the name and cursed. Then they brought him to Moses. His mother's name was Shelemith, the daughter of Dibri, in the tribe of Dan, and they put him in custody till the will of the Lord should be clear to them. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Bring out of the camp the one who cursed, and let all who hear him lay their hands on his head, and let all the congregation stone him. And speak to the people of Israel, saying, Whoever curses his God shall bear his sin. Whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him. The sojourner as well as the native, when he blasphemes the name, shall be put to death. Whoever takes a human life shall surely be put to death. Whoever takes an animal's life shall make it good, life for life. If anyone injures his neighbor as he has done, it shall be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Whatever injury he has given a person shall be given to him. Whoever kills an animal shall make it good, and whoever kills a person shall be put to death. You shall have the same rule for the sojourner and for the native, for I am the Lord your God. So Moses spoke to the people of Israel, and they brought out of the camp the one who had cursed, and stoned him with stones. Thus the people of Israel did as the Lord commanded Moses. So focusing in on this passage is really fascinating for me, given the context. And this actually helps us understand more how to read the story as a narrative. So if you recall, this is just the exact next verse after what we looked at last week. So in 24, 1 through 9 is this beautiful picture of the lamp, the 7 lampstands in the temple, representing the light of God, the presence of God shining on the 12 loaves of bread that are baked fresh every day. And we get this picture of the Liturgy of Grace. What it means to be an Israelite is to be represented as these loaves of fresh bread placed in the presence of the Lord day in and day out. And then immediately, this is one of the most jarring transitions that I can think of. You go from this picture image, this picturesque moment, to this. And there's a lot going on here. Few interesting things that jump out at me is you see a little bit of multi-ethnicity going on here. I think we've mentioned this before, but in the Exodus from Egypt, some of the Egyptians actually believed in the Lord and came to him. There was a mixed multitude that exited the land. It wasn't just Israelites, actually. And so here we actually have an example of that, an Israelite woman who was married to an Egyptian. And there's at least one instance of an Egyptian who believed in the Lord and actually came out of Egypt with the Israelites. There's a problem with this idea of blaspheming the name. And that phrase, the name, is really significant. God places his name on his people, and they are now known by the name. That's what it means to take the name of the Lord in vain, is to act in such a way that dishonors the name of God that has now been placed on God's people. And then it gets really intense. Because of this moment, they end up stoning this guy and putting him to death. One other reference here. This is a famous law called the eye for the eye law, right? And so God is setting up this dynamic within the community. This is how you're going to act to each other. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. And it's actually a huge leap forward in justice. It shows up in Exodus, in Deuteronomy, and Leviticus. God repeats this several times. It's really important, where in a society where for any kind of infraction you might take it too far. And so you have these generational feuds happening where, well, you did this to me, so I'm going to do it even worse. And it just compounds and compounds. The story of Samson in the book of Judges comes to mind, where it's just a story of escalating violence. This is actually quite a step forward in terms of human interaction and justice to say it's going to be a just punishment for the crime. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. So there's a whole realm of conversation there. I wanted to just kind of talk about why is this story directly after this story. The story of this beautiful picture of being in the presence of God with the light shining on you, and you would think that you wouldn't just jar everyone into this, where now someone is being put to death because they blasphemed the name. And I think in other commentaries, the more I study Leviticus, why this story jumps out at me is because that's very intentional. This is actually supposed to be read as a complete narrative, and it actually, in the Israelites' mind, makes perfect sense that what follows is this story of taking our place with God with utter seriousness. And so the picture here is that Israel lives in the presence of the Lord. The light of God shines on us every single day, which means we're actually supposed to take that really seriously. We don't blaspheme the name of the Lord. We treat each other like we're supposed to be treated. We don't put human life to death. We don't injure our neighbor. We don't injure our neighbor's animal. And I think as I continue to dwell on the book of Leviticus, I'm going to repeat it again. It's a liturgy of grace. And more recently, I was thinking back to that great commandment that Jesus gives us. How does he sum up the whole Old Testament? It's to love God and to love our neighbor as ourself, right? And I think you could make a good case that this liturgy of grace is a liturgy to teach us how to do this exact thing. How do we love God and how do we love our neighbor? And what we've seen throughout Leviticus is that these sacrifices, they put us in right relationship with God, but there's also sacrifices that help us reconcile with each other. There's the guilt offering. And when I commit wrong against my neighbor, I go and ask for forgiveness from them, but I also provide some sort of sacrifice. And so the liturgy is wrapped up in our relationship with each other. It's not just individuals having relationships with God. And so the way that the people come together and how they treat each other and how they treat God in God's name is all very important. And it's really significant, just to wrap this up, that God equalizes the whole thing. He says, to the foreigner, the sojourner, and the native, it's one law. The way, if you are committing yourself to be a part of this community, you're going to treat each other the way that they're supposed to be treated, and you're going to respect and treat God the way he is supposed to be treated. So you love God and you love neighbor. And the consequences are rather dire. There might be other questions that come up. This is a hard passage to wrestle with, but it really sets the tone for how serious we're supposed to take this. If this image is correct, then this is the natural consequence. We're supposed to take it that seriously. Well, I'd love to hear some questions, some thoughts from you about this. Just the juxtaposition from the first half of chapter 24 of that beautiful picture of basking in God's light to this really intense picture of someone being stoned because they blasphemed the name of the Lord. And it really does, I think, challenges me to take this all very seriously. It's a liturgy of grace, but God is very serious about how we stand in relationship to him and to others. How we love God and love others is at the core of what it means to be human. And so they take it really seriously. And I think that's at least one application from today's text. How do you need to take your own faith and your own journey, your own mode of worship more seriously this week?